This is my brand new project, a 2005 Acura TL that has a 3.2 liter V6 VTEC. In the last episode, we realized how slow the car is because it needs quite a bit of work, so we're gonna fix a bunch of things in this episode. Yay! All of the engine mounts are just toast. And as always, I got this car for dirt cheap, at least I think so. And in this video, we're not only going to fix a bunch of things with this car, 28 items to be specific, we're also going to answer a problem that a lot of people are having right now. Is it worth buying a brand new car and leasing it or financing it? Or is it still worth to buy a car that has been neglected for a while, doing all the work, and seeing if it's still cheaper to do that? And I know that not everybody is a DIYer and actually works on their own cars. So I'm going to track the amount of hours I've spent working on the car and then figuring out how much it would cost if you guys simply just took this car to the shop and fixed all of the items that we are about to fix. And as always, throughout the video, we're gonna do a full entire price breakdown to identify how much this would cost if you guys do decide to do it yourselves. And the first thing we're gonna fix on this car are the hood struts, because I can't work on the car like that. I'm really hoping after watching this, you never take your car in to change your hood struts. You simply need a small screwdriver to pop the old ones out, and then simply just pop the new hood struts in. And that's how you save $50 and a lot of time. All right, before we continue, we need to come up with a game plan because we have 28 items to fix for this car and we gotta start somewhere. The car has so many problems. It can't brake, the engine runs not really that well, and the timing belt has not been changed for over 209,000 kilometers. And there's a big problem. I've never changed the timing belt before, so this is going to be a little bit of a learning curve for me. And this car has 5 engine mounts. Why? Also, this car has no brakes. It's squeaking, the brake pads are gone, the rotors are gone. So I need to also adjust that before I take this on a test drive after. And lastly, there's a little bit of suspension work we have to do and also electrical problems. There are so many of them. I think I'm gonna adjust those a bit later. For now, let's focus on those 3 major components that will actually break this car even further if you don't fix them right away. So let's start jacking up the car. And don't worry about the hideous wheels. I know they're awful. I don't know why the previous owner installed them. I got some really cool wheels coming on the way. All right, finally jacked up the car, but before we proceed, I love to use this engine and transmission flush from Amsoil. I'm not sponsored by these guys or anything. I just love their product. The way that you use this stuff is super simple. You simply just pour this into the engine, run the engine for about 10 to 15 minutes so it circulates around the engine, and it'll clear a bunch of gunk and a bunch of oil around the oil and around the seals. It does a really good job of cleaning stuff up. I like to do this every like 4 oil changes or whenever I buy a brand new car because I don't even know when the last time the oil was changed for this car. So this is a really good thing to use for it, and it does not damage the engine at all. All right, while the engine is running, we're gonna give this car a scan because there is an airbag light that comes on and off. And I think it's an electrical issue because the airbag light would pretty much stay always on if there's some kind of a major issue with it. And I'm not sponsored by these guys, but Carly is a great tool for any DIYers out there that simply just likes to work on their cars. The scan tool scans a lot of the modules of your car and it's actually really cheap. So let's plug it in, see what issues it comes out with. Hopefully it can tell me a little bit about the electrical problems of this car because none of the lights work on the interior even when you open and close the door. Seats move back and forth, but then the memory seats don't really work. I cannot adjust my mirrors, and there's a few little other electrical issues that it comes up with. I think I have a theory about why that is. And after the scan, the only codes that popped up were for the airbag module, and all of them are communication fault codes. I have a suspicion that this is a battery-related issue, so are all of the other electrical problems that I'm having. So I'm gonna go take a look at the battery. So here's the new battery that I got for the car. And by checking the measurements, I could actually see that the car battery that the previous owner installed is much smaller than this one. So I could definitely see this being a pretty big issue for the electronics of the car and why they're not actually working. It's because the battery is probably not even supplying them with enough current or voltage because the capacity of a smaller battery is much less than a bigger one. So let's pop this one in a little bit later after I finish my timing belt job, and let's hope it fixes all of the electrical problems. All right, so for the timing belt, we have to change the timing belt and also the water pump and a bunch of little pulleys and tensioners for just the timing belt. And the timing belt is located around this area. So we need to remove all of this and also the inner arch lining to access that bottom part of the engine. So the first thing we're going to do is jack up the engine slightly and remove the engine mount by the power steering pump. You will need to use a breaker bar to loosen up the top bolt, but then you simply just remove the bracket that is connecting the engine and the engine mount. And this is the first out of the 5 mounts that we're going to change for this engine, so we're just getting started. And whatever bolts I do take out of any part, I like to put the bolts back in the exact same spot to make sure I don't lose them. We can now move on to the actual engine and relieve the tensioner of its tension so we can remove the serpentine belt. And so you guys don't get confused, a serpentine belt and a timing belt are 2 completely different belts that have different functions for the engine. And this serpentine belt doesn't look that old, it looks pretty okay. There are a few little cracks here and there, but it's still a good thing we're changing it. Now it's time for my leaky power steering pump. It is secured by 2 main bolts on each side and 2 lines, which is a high pressure line and a return line. I like to put paper towels inside the hoses to prevent them from leaking and allowing dirt to come in. And that's how you take a power steering pump out. We're smooth sailing for now. Oh my god, look at the engine mount that I'm about to change. This is how the old one is. And this is what the new one is. The rubber is not ripped. And I can't even move it. Wow. Oh my god. It completely just snapped off. Good thing I'm changing them. And now we can finally remove that bad engine mount, which is secured by 2 bolts that are directly bolted onto the chassis and the frame of the car. Okay, now we have to remove all of the inner linings to get more access to the timing belt. And then also remove the beauty covers below us because we have to drain the coolant. Because we'll be removing the water pump, we have to drain the coolant so we don't lose all of the coolant in the engine through the water pump, so at least it's going to be a bit less messy. And like most plastic liners nowadays, they are secured by simple clips that most of them did break off, but it's easy to replace them. Now I'm going to remove the timing belt covers, which are behind these guys right there. And there are quite a few bolts that you do have to take off from the bottom part of the engine and also from the top. I'm now going to take the strut brace out because the rear timing belt cover is kind of in the way when it comes to the strut brace. And also there's one engine mount that is all the way back there, and this is definitely going to be in the way. So let's take those out. And this part is called the strut brace. It actually prevents the car from twisting when you're cornering into each direction and makes the car a bit more stable on the road. So if you're making a left turn, the left side of the car comes closer to the ground and sends that tension over to the right side and keeps it more stable. Before we take that off, I think we have to take these bottom covers off because this is unfortunately not letting this pass. But before we take those off, we actually need to identify the top dead center of this engine because we need to take the harmonic balancer off and then take those covers out. This step is very crucial and you cannot make any mistakes on it, and here's exactly why. In simple terms, the timing belt controls the timing between the top and the bottom end of the engine. The top part, which is called camshafts, have exhaust and intake valves that go up and down. And the bottom part of the engine controls the piston. And all of these things have to be synchronized for the combustion to occur. So if you can imagine, if one of these components is not in time, the intake valves or even the piston might get in contact together, and then you will need a brand new engine. So the way that you know that you're a top dead center for this engine is that there is an arrow right there, a number 1, another small little arrow, and then an arrow at the very top, and all of these have to simply just be lined up. It's the exact same thing on the other side. There's just no numbers here. There's just an arrow right there and an arrow right there that simply just has to line up. This step of marking the timing belt with a highlighter is definitely optional. This is just my first time doing a timing belt job and I don't want to miss any steps, and it actually will help me out a little bit later. So here I made markings with a highlighter. It works really well on this actually. Across the belt on this side and also on this side, and lined everything up. All right, now to take the harmonic balancer out, you do need special tools for this. I bought these from Amazon for like $45, I believe. This is an impact 19mm socket to take the harmonic balancer off. and you do require an impact for it. I bought this from Facebook Marketplace for $35 because I don't have any electrical tools and I thought I could do this by hand, but apparently it's almost impossible to do this by hand. So you can find yourself a Facebook Marketplace one for cheap, I believe. You should be able to take the bolt out with just this guy right here, but if it doesn't, you will require to put this on and leverage it with a breaker bar to make sure that the engine does not move and the harmonic balancer does not move. And then you'll need to put your socket through here, and then you should be able to take it out. But firstly, I'm going to try it the simple way, and hopefully it works out. Okay, so now we can utilize this tool. Now, unfortunately, when you buy this tool, it's not going to fit through the other tool that is holding the harmonic balancer because they made this one way too thick. So I found a whole entire kit from Canadian Tire for like $40, and it has every single size possible, which is super nice, and it's much thinner, so it'll actually fit through that tool. So we'll try that out now. If this doesn't work out, I'm in a lot of trouble here because I don't know what to do after that. Yeah, this bolt was definitely not coming loose. I even tried using a breaker bar from different angles to try removing it, but unfortunately nothing seemed to work. All right, seems like I'm out of options. So what I'm gonna do now is attach the big impact socket, the 19mm, onto the breaker bar and try just starting the engine just for like a millisecond, just so it moves the harmonic balancer while keeping the bolt in place, and hopefully that will come loose. I've never done this before. I've never even changed the timing belt before, but realistically speaking, what you should be doing is simply just buying a bigger impact gun. Yeah, I think mine is just not as powerful as I wish it was. All right, we currently have the breaker bar resting on the control arm area. So hopefully when I spin it, the bolt will come loose. I'm really scared about this. I don't know about this one. All right. Moment of truth. Let's see if this works. I think it worked. Let's see. All right, let's see if it worked. Yes! Worked! That's a good hack to know. Hopefully I didn't damage anything, but I guess we'll see when we start it up. This was definitely a big relief that I could take that bolt out. Now we can finally remove the harmonic balancer off, and there is a little tooth that has to stay either in the engine, and if it does come out, just make sure you never lose it, because that's how you will time the engine a bit later. And now we are back at the top dead center from both sides, as we had it before. Now that we have access to the bottom part of the engine, we can take all the covers off and reveal the timing of the bottom part of the engine. Once again, I'm going to keep a mark on it for myself, and we can take this little metal bracket off. And now that we confirmed the timing of the top and the bottom part of the engine, we can finally restart removing the accessories. Now we have to remove the tensioner of the timing belt, which looks like this. Very similar to a serpentine belt tensioner. I'm a little suspicious because these parts actually do not look that bad. But there's no stickers or anything, and I contacted the previous owner and he said it was never done. So timing belts are very sensitive. If you do not do them, they will snap and you will lose an engine. So it's better to just go through this and spend a little bit of money in doing it. Taking this to the dealership would definitely make it very expensive, which is why we're doing it ourselves, to save a lot of that money. Now we can remove one of the pulleys, very similar to an idler pulley. And doing this pretty labor-intensive job will hopefully reveal us if it's worth it to do this, or maybe it is simpler to just lease or finance a new car. Now that a bunch of the components are loose and the timing belt will just come out, it is very important to not spin any of the gears because the engine is timed perfectly right now. And if you do spin it and then you put the timing belt on, it's going to be out of time, which means kaboom. It is very easy to spin one of the gears or one of the camshafts, especially with the teeth of a timing belt. So please make sure that you're very careful when taking this off and you're not pulling on the belt so you don't spin one of the gears. Yes. Sweet. And once again, this doesn't look that bad, almost like it was definitely changed within the last 10 years. Now we can move on to the water pump, which is driven by the timing belt. So if this starts to leak, unfortunately, we have to remove the whole entire timing belt system just to remove the water pump, which is why we do them together. Make sure you have some kind of a catch pan that will catch a lot of the coolant. Even draining the radiator, there was still a lot in the engine. It seems like there's a date code on this. 1202. I don't think that's December 2002. That's probably February 2012. But nevertheless, it's been already 12 years, so good thing that we are changing it now if it's the 2012. I guess this explains why the parts don't look that bad. But now we're finally at a point where we can start putting things back together and putting a new timing belt in. And if you guys are following along or like what you see, now would be a good time to subscribe. It's completely free. Now you can put a brand new tensioner in. Make sure you take this piece out of the old tensioner and put some grease on it. Before installing the tensioner, we should put the water pump back on. It's very important to clean the surface between the water pump and the seal, because if this starts to leak, we will have to redo this whole entire thing, which I don't want to do. Now we can install a new pulley and a new tensioner like I showed earlier. And all of these parts I bought from Rock Auto, which you can find in the link below. And now it's finally time to put in a new timing belt. I found it the easiest to wire it through the bottom part of the engine and wrap it around the camshaft. And once again, it's very easy to pull on one if the camshaft or one of the gears accidentally while putting the timing belt on. So be careful with it, because if your engine does go out of time, you'll have to retime it again. And to make it a bit easier on myself, I transferred the old highlighter markings from the old belt onto the new one, so I can simply slip it on and verify if it's aligned or not. Now we can finally secure the bottom part of the engine, and it will tell us if we are fully in time or not. And once the 3 gears are aligned with the belt on, we can install the last tensioner. And once we pull on that pin, it will put the tension on the timing belt. Okay, now is a big moment of truth. We're gonna put the crank bolt back to the bottom part of where the harmonic balancer was and give the whole entire system a revolution to make sure that all 3 of the points still are matching up. If after 1 revolution, even one of those things are a little off and it skipped a tooth or something like that, we'll have to retake everything out, realign everything, and then put everything back together. So hopefully we don't have to do that. So let's put this on, try it out. Now this is the big moment of truth. If I'm even off by 1 tooth, eventually the valves will connect with the pistons and I will need to get a brand new engine. And after a few revolutions by hand, it seems like I'm all good. I'm pretty aligned, but we will know when we first start it up. Hopefully it should be okay. Everything seems lined up, so we'll see when it starts, I guess. Now we can finally put back the harmonic balancer. The way that this one goes on is that I do still have to use the special tool to hold it in place and then torque this down. This has a special torquing procedure, which I'm going to research right now. But once I do figure that out, this should be in. And this is where the tooth that I told you about earlier is very important in this case, because this is a balancer. It makes sure that the balance of the engine is good while it's running, and that tooth is simply aligns all of that in place. And unfortunately, I couldn't really find the correct torquing procedure for this. I don't think it has one. I think it just needs to be torqued to spec. So I torqued it to 180 foot-pounds of torque. And now we are at the final stages of this timing belt job. We just need to put the black covers over the timing belt and install the new engine mount. I didn't mean what I told you, but you took it to heart. And now we can replace the leaky power steering pump with this brand new one, once again from Rock Auto. And thank God it's at the top of the engine, so it'll be pretty easy to replace. And with the new power steering pump, I did receive new O-rings, so make sure you replace them and don't overlap them with the old ones, because if you do, they will leak. Now it's time for the serpentine belt tensioner. It comes in 2 different pieces, so the actual tensioner and then a pulley that goes onto the tensioner here. I think the easiest thing to do is just put the tensioner on first and then the pulley on after. So at least that's what I'm gonna do. There's definitely not a lot of space between the engine and the frame of the car to fit in these components, but I am new at this and it seems like I'm getting a hang of it. Alright, the engine bay is finally fully done. Everything is zipped up. We put the serpentine belt back on. Now we have to drain the oil because we put that AMSOIL liquid into it, so we can't really run the engine on that. So for us to do a quick oil change, we have to take out the engine filter, which is located right here conveniently for us. And then I also want to change the brakes tonight, even though it's already 10:30 p.m. But this is my ride home, so I kind of have to get this done, and the brakes are atrocious on this thing. I cannot drive this car anymore on that sound. I found the location of this oil filter pretty weird behind the wheel, as a lot of the other cars, they have them in a much more accessible way where you don't even have to remove the wheels or anything. But it seems to be working for this Japanese car, so I'll leave it as is. When I first test drove the car when I bought it, I instantly noticed how bad these brakes were. And I was really interested to see how bad the brake pads are. And a lot of these bolts and caliper pins were definitely seized, so I'm guessing these brakes were not changed for a very long time. And I was definitely right, because there's no more brake pad on my brake pad. No surprise to why they were squeaking so much. Good thing I'm changing them pretty soon, because that could have been dangerous. But the rotor didn't seem that bad. There was no lip on it or any excessive rust, so that was good. We're gonna put a little bit of anti-seize on that hub and then install the new rotor. These rotors and brake pads I got from Summit Racing. They were pretty expensive, but they had a $110 rebate that I definitely wanted to use. I paid $386 for these, but then I got my $110 rebate back, which made these brakes really good for very cheap. And finally, the brakes are done. We can install the strut brace back on and change it to a new battery. Hopefully, you can fix at least a few electrical problems. Moment of truth, let's start it. Yay, it runs! Hey, I guess we got the timing right. It runs perfect. Green light, let's get it. I'm the future, I'm in it. Check score, I'm winning. Green light, let's get it. I just win. So we fixed everything up, and I took it on the test drive. And unfortunately, my brakes are still squeaking. Pretty badly. At least I have brakes now, which is nice. But I think that the reason why my brakes are squeaking is because I missed a step. So technically, it's on me. I think when I took out the caliper guide pins, I didn't re-grease them, and one of them was actually seized. So my theory is that when the caliper compresses to the brake pad, it has to go back to its spot when I release the brake. And I think because the bottom caliper guide is seized, the caliper kind of just does this, and then the brake pad at the bottom is still kind of catching onto the rotor, and that's what's constantly squeaking. So I'm gonna take the wheel off, take the caliper off again, and try getting those guides out, even though it was really difficult and one of them was seized. So hopefully a little bit of fire will kind of eases them up a little bit, and then we'll re-grease them and clean them up as well. And then hopefully I should have no more squeaking problems. So after taking everything off, it actually seems like this part is rubbing. Pretty much the rotor against this clip right here. Yeah, because these caliper pins are actually moving back and forth like they're supposed to. So I'm gonna take a look at that. So I believe I fixed this by pushing with a little screwdriver just between there and then kind of just pushing on this back. Don't worry, we don't use this part of the rotor, so you can use the little screwdriver there to kind of wedge it in. But now you can see it's not really touching anymore and there's good clearance. I'm still gonna clean these out from the inside, but just putting some brake clean and using a brush to it. And then putting some new grease in there and on the pins to make sure that these are sliding nice and smoothly. Hopefully now we should be all good. And even though the other side caliper bolts came out with these, unfortunately these ones were completely seized. Ugh. And it definitely makes sense why. There's a lot of rust and absolutely no grease in these. We also were given a little bit of hardware that we do need to install, and once cleaning them out, they look much better. And the easiest way I found to put the guide pins back in is by installing the new rubber hardware on the sides of it and then sliding the pins through it. I definitely struggled with this, so hopefully you guys will not. And now they're sliding freely. And finally, we can reinstall the caliper and we're done with the front brakes. All right, before we proceed with the rear brakes, I want to do a little bit of a price breakdown because we have done quite a few things and I want to make sure you guys are up to speed when it comes to the pricing. So I bought the car for $4,250. which is not necessarily a steal, but it's also not really a bad price for a car that has 200,000 kilometers and it's literally 20 years old. And the condition that the car is in is not that bad. It's just been neglected in the maintenance aspect of it. So I don't think that's a horrible deal. I think it's actually pretty good when it comes to the market value. Now, these are all the parts that I've changed up until this point. The total of all of these parts, including the initial inspection that we've done, is $1,770.98. And unfortunately, we still have a lot of things to do that are not part of this list, so the total is going to be a lot higher than I thought it would be. This is the point of me doing the test to see if a used car is still a better deal than buying a brand new car. Maybe it's not anymore because the prices of parts are just way too expensive. At the end of the video, I'm going to do another update of the price with everything that I've done. Now, let's move on to the rear brakes. The rear brakes were definitely in much better condition than the front ones, but we got all 4 sets of brakes that we have to change, and we got them for a very good price, so I couldn't say no. And changing the rear brakes is very similar to the front ones. The only difference is the handbrake system. Now, the way that I like to adjust the parking brake a little bit whenever I do the rear brakes, and the reason why you do the parking brake is because over time, whenever you use it, the brake pads do get worn out. And when they get worn out, it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to change them. Like, these are still in excellent condition and there's still quite a bit of meat left on them. So the only thing I'm trying to do is actually just make them come out a little bit because they are wearing down a little bit. And the way that you do that is at the bottom, there's a wheel that you can simply turn and it literally just moves the rotors out a little bit. So right now I push them out to the point of where the parking brake is off right now and the rotor is literally catching on it. So this is when I know that I need to dial it down a little bit. So now there's no more sound, so now I know it's good. Usually when I get to this point, I like to dial it down by just 2 more clicks. And that's when I know that the parking brake shouldn't be super loose or shouldn't be really tight. And that's when you know that you can stop. Another way that I do like to check it out is by literally pulling on that handbrake and making sure that when I'm halfway up, it is actually grabbing the rotor. So right now it's fully off and it's not grinding. The handbrake about halfway up and it's fully caught on. So this is my personal ideal way of doing it. If it's halfway up, it catches the rotor, and then when it's fully up, it will hold the car in place. And that to me is a perfect adjustment. And now that the rear brakes look good, we have to complement them with brand new wheels and tires, which you guys will see a little bit later. All right, now we're gonna change the other engine mounts and also the transmission mounts. All right, the other mounts that are left for this car are the front and rear engine mounts and also transmission mounts. We have already changed one transmission mount by the power steering pump, and then there's 2 more for the engine, which is at the front right there, and then 1 at the very back behind all that mess. And then there are 2 for the transmission, which is all underneath the stuff. We will deal with that a bit later. I don't understand why this car needs 5 mounts to hold up the engine and the transmission. A Mercedes engine is much more heavier and it only has 3. And look at the size of these engine mounts. They're almost the size of my head. So the front and the rear mount, they pretty much look identical. So we're gonna change the front first because I think that's a bit easier. I've checked out online and it seems like a lot of people like to take the front radiator and drain the coolant because there's not a lot of space to work on that engine mount when all of this stuff is in the way. Which I kind of understand, but I think I can do it without taking all that stuff off because I don't want to drain any more coolant because I honestly ran out when I did the timing belt job. So I'm just going to tackle it by taking those 2 bolts off or by removing the bracket, and then I should have access to the engine mount. And hopefully then I could just maneuver the engine mount through the pipes and kind of just move these out of the way, and I should be able to take that out. I'm just gonna try it out. I feel like a dealership would charge a bit more time to change that mount because they would remove all of that stuff, and even if they don't, they would just still charge you the full amount. But I want to save some time and also money, so let's try figuring that out without taking all that stuff off. So by taking a look at this engine mount, it seems like there's 1 main bolt right here, 2 from the sides. This is probably where the bracket holds onto, and then there's 4 bolts at the bottom. I did also notice this hole right here, which I'm not quite sure what it is, but I think something goes into it. We'll see when we get there. Now that we got the bracket out of the way, it is important to put a jack underneath your engine because we will be releasing that engine mount from all of its weight. Make sure to put a couple of wooden pieces underneath the engine to make sure that you're not cracking and you're spreading the load across the engine, not just on one point. Without any ratcheting wrenches, this job is pretty difficult, so make sure you get some. Make sure to also have some extensions handy because you will need quite a few of them to reach those bolts. Oh my god, all of the engine mounts are just toast. Now we can pivot the engine mount on its side and we can see what is connected to that bottom hole. It's some kind of a breather for the hydraulics potentially, but you can simply just use some pliers and pry it out. Taking the engine mount out without taking the radiator was definitely hard, but I did save a lot of time by doing it this method. Yay! And I was surprised to see that these mounts are actually hydraulic filled, so these mounts should be really smooth when I install them. Now we just have to transfer over some things from the old mount to the new one, like the breather hose and also the rubber casing. And the new mount is ready to go in. I wish it was as easy as taking it out. Because the top part of the mount was intact with the new one, it was definitely much harder to put the full mount in. I even had to use a crowbar to move the engine out of the way a little bit so I could create more space for the engine mount. I then had to think of even more alternatives because nothing was letting this mount go in. Alright, I originally couldn't put the mount back in because the engine couldn't really move independently because of that mount by the power steering pump. So when you loosen that up and then jack up the engine a little bit, you will have much more space to put the engine mount in. And finally, we can secure the mount into its spot. The next items that we're going to be working on are going to be the transmission mounts, one more engine mount, which is located at the back of the engine, and then the valve cover gasket. The reason why I'm doing them all at the same time is because once I'll be removing and working on the top part of the engine for the valve cover, it'll be easy for me to access the rear engine mount because it's literally dug behind all of that between the engine and the firewall. And the transmission mounts are actually a bit of a pain point for these from what I've researched. They are located right underneath the battery, so I have to remove the bolts from the top part of the car right here and then also work from the bottom of the car where the driver's side arch lining is. And then while we're doing the transmission work, we can also change its fluids and then also change the struts because mine are really worn out. And because this car is my daily driver, I have to rebuild it every single time I complete part of the car, and now I have to remove all the covers again. Removing the air intake system was a bit finicky because one of these lines is a coolant hose, and removing that will leak out a lot of coolant. But now we can take the whole entire intake system off by just removing these bolts, and we can finally slide the whole entire intake out of the way. And we finally have access to the transmission mounts and the filter. Alright, so here's the old mount. It's right below here and it looks pretty old, pretty brittle. I think it's even cracked right there. So the way this is orientated is like this. So that means we've got to take the top bolt off, and then there's also 3 that are going to be right against this part right here, which is right behind the wheel. The 3 bolts were actually inside the engine bay, but we will get to that a little bit later. Alright, so the valve cover gaskets on these is actually kind of complicated because we have to remove the intake, which is this part right here. The valve covers are on the side, so we have to pretty much remove everything from the top, which has a bunch of vacuum hoses, the coils we have to remove, and there's some other connectors and sensors that we have to unplug, and then also remove this top part of the intake because oil is actually just going through here. So before you guys start this job, make sure you guys take a picture of everything because it might get complicated when you just start unplugging everything, which is what I'm going to do now. And once again, we're going to continue taking off the black covers on the outskirts of the engine bay, and then also moving on to the strut brace once again because we have to remove the rear engine mount and also the rear valve cover gasket, and this will definitely be in the way. And before taking the intake off, we need to unplug a bunch of coolant hoses, a bunch of vacuum hoses, and also different types of sensors that are connected to the intake. Alright, now the 3.2 VTEC badge can be removed from the top part of the intake, which will reveal a lot of the head bolts of the intake. And this part is actually a lot cleaner than I thought it would be, and the intake flap seems to be working perfectly fine and they're all clean of carbon. And now we can finally start removing those intake bolts. They are torqued pretty tightly, so you will have to use quite a bit of force, even maybe a breaker bar to remove them. And these are not stretch bolts or anything, so you can reuse them, but I like to organize them and put them back in the exact same spots where they came out of. Oh. Woohoo! And now we definitely have more access for the valve cover gaskets, and we can even see the valves, and they look perfect. Make sure you don't forget to remove the multi-layered gasket, which has about 6 layers. And I've also decided to put some tape over the intake holes to make sure that nothing gets in it once I'm removing the valve cover gaskets. All right, now that we got the intake out of the way, we can finally move on to removing the engine harness for the coil packs, and then we will tackle the rear engine mount before we will remove the valve covers. The reason why we want to do that is because the valve covers are going to expose the top part of the engine, and we don't want any dirt and stuff getting in it while we're removing that rear mount. But once we remove the wiring, we should have a little bit more access to that rear engine mount. So let's get to it. And the rear engine mount is actually very similar to the front one, so hopefully this is going to be a familiar job. And now we can start removing everything that is on top of the valve covers, including the coils and the engine harnesses. And before putting the coils back in, we are also going to replace the spark plugs. And similar to the front mount, we will just remove the bracket that holds the top part of the mount in. And once again, with a lot of extensions, we can reach the engine mount bolts. And this was definitely not fun because you can't really see nor feel where you're putting the breaker bar on. I even had to step inside the engine bay so I can actually reach the last part of the bolt. Yay! And we only have the top engine mount bolt to remove, but we do need to jack up the engine a little bit for that. I supported it right above the transmission pretty much. The engine mount is located right around this area, so supporting it here will be enough to just simply raise it up and to make sure that the engine doesn't lower when you're putting the new mount in. And similar to the front engine mount, there was that hydraulic hose that we had to remove from the bottom part of the mount. It's the same exact thing for the rear part, so it's important to pivot it on its side so you can easily remove that hose. And this one was very easy to take out. And now through all the hoses and electronics between the firewall and the engine, you can shimmy this through, but it will take a lot of patience and energy. Whew. And I'm definitely happy that I'm changing all of the mounts because even this last engine mount, it was almost on the verge of fully coming out again. And similar to the front engine mount, we had to transfer the rubber, I'm assuming dampener of some sort, onto the rear part of the mount. And I've noticed that the rear engine mount, the new one, does not actually have a hydraulic line plug-in, so that makes my job much easier. And now we can fit the mount in through the hoses and the wires and put it in its original spot. But we do need to raise the engine up just slightly bit so it fits in its spot properly. But the engine mount had some other plans in mind. So I made a mistake. I put on the engine mount on backwards, so now the bolts are not lined up. So it's fully in from the top part right there, but as you can see, the bolts are not aligned at all. I can't believe I did that. But thankfully there was just enough space to actually rotate the engine mount there and fit it in properly. Now we can refocus back onto our engine valve cover gaskets finally. There are a couple more hoses that we had to take off with the wires, and finally they should be able to come off with ease. Well, at least I thought so. After removing all of the wires, we can now separate the valve cover from the actual engine with a screwdriver and rotate it sideways so you can slide it off fully, but that was a bit of a challenge. Thankfully, the front valve cover was much easier to remove than the rear one. Though the valve cover was leaking, I thought these would be a lot more brittle than they were, but these were pretty okay. There were a few cracks here and there, but I'm glad I'm replacing them. And thankfully, the valve train looks awesome. The oil changes were definitely done on time. And on top of the valve cover gaskets, there are also these grommet gaskets that you have to remove for the spark plugs and the coils. You can simply use some tweezers and a screwdriver, but there is a special tool that you can get to make your life a bit easier. To put them back in, you simply just re-grease them and just bash them into its spot with a screwdriver. I found the easiest, and voila, your valve cover is ready to go back in. It's definitely a good feeling when you're putting the car back together. Now, for the bolts that hold the valve cover on top of the engine, you do have to replace the rubber grommet as well. The easiest way I found is by cutting the rubber part off and sliding the metal part out. And to put the new grommet back on, you simply just grab an 18mm socket, place the grommet on top of that, and just slide the bolt through the new grommet. Just like that. And when torquing them onto the valve cover, these do not require a lot of torque at all, and I like to install it in a star pattern to make sure that the valve cover is seated on evenly. And once the valve covers are finally installed, I can actually start working on the spark plugs before fully installing all the electronics and the hoses. And these spark plugs don't look that bad, but I'm definitely glad I'm changing them because it's just cheap maintenance. And after replacing all of the spark plugs, we can now start popping the coil packs back on and plugging in all the wires and the vacuum hoses. It's finally starting to look like an engine now. We can now put the intake back on, and the first step is to replace the protective tape by an actual gasket, and these are reusable. Putting the intake on top of the engine does require you to do it very vertically because there are studs that are poking out, and that's how the intake is fully aligned on top of the engine. And before putting the intake bolts back on, I found it the easiest to plug all the hoses and all the electronics back onto the intake because there is a little bit of movement that might be required. And now we can start pattern all of the intake bolts back on. And finally, we can put our 3.2 VTEC badge back on. And that's engine all done. Alright, now that we're done with all of our engine work, well, most of it at least, we can finally move on to the transmission. We have 2 transmission mounts to change the fluid, and most importantly, the transmission filter. At the beginning of the video, I told you guys that these automatic transmissions could be kind of detrimental a bit, but that is mostly because a lot of people just don't maintain these transmissions. They change the fluid way too late, or they simply just don't change the transmission filter. This filter is in a little bit of a weird spot, which is why I think it's not done that often, but these transmission filters actually degrade over time. So when a car is 20 years old and the transmission filter was never changed or the fluid was never changed, these start to degrade internally and become part of the transmission. And then of course, inside the transmission, there's bits of the transmission filter, which is not good, which is why the transmission usually burn up. But before buying the car, I wanted to make sure that the transmission fluid was changed before, and I did ask the previous owner when was the last time it was changed, and he said it was changed at around 117,000 kilometers, which is really good. So now at 215,000 kilometers, we can do a second interval of this, and we can find out if the transmission filter was changed or not. If it wasn't, good thing we're changing it. The filter is located right behind this housing right here. I'm guessing this is some kind of a banjo bolt. So, and see that white line right there? That gives me hope that this was probably changed before and this was torqued to spec, unless that's factory. It should be pretty easy to change because we have all of this out of the way, but we simply just have to remove the banjo bolt, and there's 1, 2, and 3 bolts right there, and this plate should just come out. But it seems like one of the transmission mounts is in the way, so let's remove that first. And thank God I'm changing this one because this one is also cracked, like all the other ones. The 3 bolts on the side are a bit finicky to take out because there's just not a lot of space to put a ratchet in there, but with the right extensions it made the job pretty easy. And unfortunately I couldn't separate my mount from the actual bracket, so I just took them out together. And now we have much more space to remove the transmission filter after removing the banjo bolt and that cover. And you will lose a little bit of transmission fluid, so make sure you have something underneath the car. And this is a clear example why these should be changed. This one already started to degrade. The metal part of the housing started to separate, and you can even see the orange part as part of the filter. Thank God it was caught, but imagine that going inside the transmission. And this is exactly why you gotta change these. And putting the new filter in is pretty self-explanatory, but you do need to transfer this old grommet from the old transmission filter onto the new one. And a spring will come out of the transmission when you pop the old one off, so make sure to put that in before securing the banjo bolt into place. And after you're done with the filter, we can now put in the new transmission mount with the 3 bolts and also secure the bracket into its place. And voila, this part of the transmission is fully done. Now we got one more transmission mount to put in and change the transmission fluid. But before we start draining it out, I always like to take the fill off to make sure that I can actually open it before draining it. The fill for this car is located right there. Now you will need a breaker bar to remove this top part of the bolt because the previous person that was working on this definitely tightened it. And it is easy to identify the bolt that says ATF on the top of it. Now the drain bolt was very hard to take off, so I even had to use my legs to actually loosen the bolt up. And this fluid didn't look great, but it also didn't look that black. It had a little bit of redness to it, so it does tell me that it was changed probably about 100,000 kilometers ago. Now the drain bolt is magnetic, so you will have a little bit of residue on it, and this part is really important to check out, because if you have some big metal chunks in it or something shiny, that probably means that something is breaking internally in your transmission, and thank God there was nothing bad here. And like all my other fluids, I'm obviously going to put some AMSOIL transmission fluid into this, and you will need a long funnel to make it work. Alright, just one more thing for the transmission left, which is the bottom transmission mount, and that is located behind the wheel arch, so we have to take the wheel off. And this mount has 2 bolts at the very top and 2 nuts at the bottom. The bolts can be taken off from the wheel arch area, which are located right here, and the nuts can be taken off from the bottom part of the frame. You will need, once again, a lot of extensions and a breaker bar to loosen up those top bolts. And it's the same for the bottom nuts as well. Now, removing the mount was not simple. You did have to raise the transmission up slightly, but even that made it very tricky. After loosening up all the bolts, it is much easier to remove the transmission through the front of the car, which is exactly what I did. And this mount doesn't look bad from the far, but when you do look a little bit closer, there is almost a whole entire crack and a split across the rubber part and the actual thing. And putting the new mount in was the same as taking it off, but in reverse. Now we can focus on the strut assemblies, and the reason why I'm changing these is because my steering wheel feels a little bit floaty, and apparently it's a common issue with these. And apparently changing the strut assembly helps with that. So we're going to start by taking off the pinch bolt, and it definitely required some persuasion. Then we could just loosen up the top strut bolt mount and remove the whole entire assembly through the bottom. You do need to maneuver it around a little bit, but once you play around with it, it is pretty easy to take out. And putting the new one in is the exact same as taking it out. It just requires you putting the pinch bolt back in and securing the strut from the very top as well. And that's how easy it is to change struts on this car. Both sides are fully complete, and now we can finally start putting the car fully back together and starting it up for the very first time. And the final part that I did install is a brand new engine air filter. I can't believe that we're finally done all the mechanical parts of this car, and I'm finally going to have a good, reliable daily driver. Well, hopefully. Is it cheaper than leasing or financing? I guess we'll have to find out in the next episode. And we still have electrical and body work to finish in this car, but for now, let's finally start her up. Ooh, right. Moment of truth. Okay, I think we're okay. We have to do something about the exhaust of the system though, because I don't like the way it sounds, and that will be in the next episode. Thank you so much for watching. We're gonna find out if this car can drive in the next episode as well. And we will finally answer the question if it's worth it to buy an older car, put some money into it, fix it up, or is it better to just finance and lease a new car? We're gonna find that out in the next episode. Thank you so much for watching. Like, subscribe, and share, and I'll see you guys in the next one.